to Athens Treasures Live. We're here in McClatchey County, about 11 miles from Athens, 4 miles north of Calhoun, and just about 4 miles south of Riceville on Cedar Springs Road. We're out here in an area known as the East Denali Valley, a place of history, a great treasure not only for Athens but for all of McClatchey County as well. So welcome to a new episode. Just as a note, let me say that Scott Bridwell hasn't been well. He took his COVID vaccines and they put a little whammy on him, and so be praying for Scott. He's recovering and doing well, and hopefully he'll be back with us soon on one of our next few episodes of Athens Treasures Live. We appreciate him. He does a great job, and we look forward to him being back. But today, here we are at what is called Sweetbriar, Holly Hill as it's known today if you see it off in the distance. That home was built in 1820 by John McClatchey, one of the oldest homes in McClatchey County. A true treasure. It's been taken well care of, maintained, and added on to over the years. Inside you'll find the original floors, and many of the original walls are still there, as well as the original fireplaces in the kitchen area. Beautiful indeed it is, made from the federal Victorian architecture of that day. You go in and you find the parlors and the big bedrooms, the high ceilings, and it is a wonder indeed, and we'll be taking a look at it more in detail as we go along in this episode. But you will see off in the distance, well, I'm going to call it Sweetbriar Hill, because that's what it is known as, and that's what it was in the beginning, and from 1820. Now later on it was renamed Holly Hill, and I'll explain that in just a moment. So come along with me now as we talk a little bit more about Holly Hill, Sweetbriar Hill, and we're going to show you some more of the surrounding area and what all went on in this area. It was a great industrial area of the day. Actually, before Athens even was Athens, this place was built and became a very thriving industrial area of commerce and farming with a great population as well. Not only here, but Calhoun and also Columbus, long before Athens became Athens. So come with me now as we talk a little bit more about it. As we continue talking about Sweetbriar Hill and the East Denali Valley area here, we come to the McClatchey family cemetery, which is in view of the home, just sitting over the rise here, just to my right, your left. Buried here is John McClatchey II, who was born in 1769 in the Carolinas. He died in 1840 here in McClatchey County. He came to this area in 1820 after hearing of the fertile lands that had opened up during the Hiwassee Purchase. Prior to him coming here, Allen Grubb, who had been in this area from around 1790 as a medical helper and also as an interpreter for the Indian agencies for the Chickasaw and the Cherokee, made a claim to 640 acres right here in this area, because his wife was a full-blooded Cherokee and he had the rights to make that claim in 1819 after the Hiwassee Purchase. Well, in 1820, Allen Grubb had to go off on a business trip, and while he was gone, James Calloway, who also settled in this area, made a bid on the land as the Hiwassee land sales went underway, and he took the land from Allen Grubb out from under him, and then John McClatchey, having learned of this land, contacted James Calloway, and he obtained that 640 acres that we now stand on, and which the house is upon, and which later on we'll look at where the mill is in that day. So in 1820, John McClatchey brought his family here, his wife and 3 children. He built the house of Sweetbriar, a beautiful palatial house of the day. He began to clear and farm the area, and then he proceeded to build a mill, a grist mill. And also he had a mill where he had a cotton gin. He also had a forge with a blacksmith shop and a tannery, and there were marble works as well. So it was quite an operation. And then in 1840, John McClatchey died, and the land and the house went to his 2 sons, Adolphus and Jared. Jared ended up with the house, and he raised his family there. The 2 boys together made a very industrious living off of the grist mills and all of the surrounding tannery and marble works of that day. Many people lived in this area, and it was a beautiful area indeed, and a growing and thriving area, much more so than Calhoun and Columbus, on down to the east and south from here. And Athens, which had come into being in 1822 and was beginning to grow, was nothing like this area here in the East Denali Valley. And so in 1862, when the war broke out, Jarrett, being a very staunch Confederate Southerner, decided that it was in his best interest to sell out and move his family to Marietta, Georgia, in the Kennesaw area, where his 2 sons, Devereaux and William Penn, were in the military institute there. His other son, John, had gone off to war that had just started, and so they ended up selling the farm and all of the mill and everything that went with it in 1863 to James Geddes, the only living descendant of James Geddes, who was the founder of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, who was living, his son, James Geddes Jr., living in Meigs County, Tennessee, and owned a mill there and was very prosperous and industrious as well. And so James Geddes bought this place at that time for $25,000. This place was valued at that time at $42,000, and today's money would be around $400,000, $500,000. And so that's quite a deal for 1,000 acres of land and all the buildings and businesses and houses that went with it. And so James Geddes bought that, and in 1869 he added on to Sweetbriar, the home, and he renamed it Holly Hill because Mrs. McClatchey had planted 2 holly trees in front of the house, and he admired them so much he decided to rename the home Holly Hill. And then later on, a year or so later after that, he decided to add on to the mills and added a big woolen mill, and we're going to look at it in just a little bit over here where the mill sat, and it was very prosperous indeed as well. So come along as we move now to where the mills are, and we'll talk a little more about them there. Well, here we are at the old woolen mill here in what was known as Sanfordville at the time. That was when Frank Geddes owned it. Actually, James Geddes owned it, and then he turned it over to his two sons, and Frank Geddes was the one who ended up living in the home and did a lot of the renovations that came later. And so Frank Geddes operated this mill up until around 1885, and then it was taken over. It was a woolen mill, and it was taken over by a Knoxville woolen mill and renamed the Hiawassee Manufacturing Company. In around 1885 or so, the Sanford Post Office moved its operations here to what was known as Gettyston, and we'll look at the commissary and the old post office in just a moment. But they moved into that old commissary, and it became the post office of this area, and they renamed this area Sanfordville. Then in 1891 they decided to move the post office back over to Lee Highway, over on Highway 11 where the railroad spurs were. They moved the town over there in 1891, and so the post office left here, went back over there, and that over there, known now as the Sanford area, is the Sanford area. But this has always really been known as the East Denali Valley, even though during Geddes' time they called it Sanfordville. All around these hills surrounding this mill and the other mill works that were here at the time had about 30 to 35 homes here. There were about somewhere between 30 and 50 people working in the mills and in the tannery and the grist mill, which the grist mill not only did flour, but they did corn as well. And then they had the stone works, the marble works, where they cut marble. That was fascinating indeed in itself. They had a forge and a blacksmith shop. They had a sawmill here that cut chestnut trees. 65 feet high these trees were, and they were surrounding all this area. They were popular in that day, but you know, many years ago a blight hit the chestnut in this area. Most of them are gone now, but they were a very good tree indeed to cut in a sawmill. So this was a very industrious area, a very profitable area, and this mill stayed in operation here. This was the woolen mill. It stayed in operation to around 1902 when it went out of operation. Now we're going to talk just a little bit about the commissary and the post office, and we'll pan over to it in just a minute. And then I want to share with you as we close two letters. One written by Devereaux Forey McClatchey around 1900, 1902, 40 years after his family left this place. He came back to visit. He has a fascinating letter that I want to share with you. His brother, William Penn, also came back just a few months later, and he also wrote a very fascinating letter that I'll share with you as well, full of history that you will never forget and that you need to hear. So bear with me now as we turn our attention to the commissary just across the way. Well, if we keep moving around, you're going to get dizzy, aren't you? Here in the distance you see the old commissary, the post office, where the folks who worked and lived around this area could come and buy their food stores and their groceries, and they had a post office that they could send their mails off to and receive their mail in that day. We're going to look next at the old works down here that Saul Paul, a very important man of his day, in 1869, when this woolen mill was erected, he put in the dam works on the East Denali down here underground into the woolen mill. Inside that woolen mill, those water works pulled great belts that went to the second floor, pulling great wheels and gears that turned the wool equipment, the equipment that made the wool, well, anyway, you know what I'm talking about, the woolen things up there. I'm losing my mind. So we're going to look a little bit about this down here. So come along with me as we look at what Saul Paul made, and it's still here intact. Now here we are, folks, down here on the East Denali Creek, and you'll find here these stoneworks that were made by Saul Paul, who was a great stoneworks engineer of his time, and he made this structure so that the waters from the East Denali would be diverted underground into that woolen mill that we looked at just a few minutes ago. Here's all that's left of this dam and these stoneworks here, but it is a sight to see. I hope you'll make your way here and see it sometime soon. Now let's make our way back up off of this river just a little bit, and we'll go up here and talk a little bit about this letter that I spoke of. But before we do that, let me pan over and let you look at how beautiful the East Denali Creek is here. Folks, I'm behind the camera right now, and I'm going to share with you, as we watch the East Denali flow, this letter by Devereaux Forey McClatchey, written 40 years after his family sold this place and moved to Georgia. He writes, "A visit to my boyhood home after being away 40 years by Devereaux Forey McClatchey. Old East Tennessee 40 years ago was one of the garden spots of the world. Here were attractive farms with expensive homes lived in by some of the most enterprising, intellectual, well-to-do, happy and contented people to be found anywhere living in their lovely country homes. Then war came along with the bitter sentiment between the two factions. Strong Union feeling and bitter feelings of secession divided neighbor against neighbor. This vile condition, brought about by the politicians, produced a feeling in this country that is indescribable. Some made arrangements to go to the front at Manassas. Others made arrangements to go north to keep from being forced to join the Confederate Army. Those who sympathized with secession had to take their stand when it was found the Federal forces were pressing forward and soon would take possession of this part of the country. They were left with no choice but to leave, as they would have met certain death and absolute destruction of their once happy homes. Such was the condition of things when, as a boy of 14, I had to leave with my father, mother, and brothers, taking with us the stock and Negroes. We left behind one of the most palatial homes ever seen in any country. I found, after being away 40 years, that the old home, the old mill, the mill pond, and the old rock spring were still there, with many other things that reminded me of my boyhood days. I could see in passing familiar pictures when I was a boy again at home. I could not realize 40 years had intervened. There was the same old ground where the schoolhouse stood, but no house. There was the same ground where we used to play with our sweethearts and neighborhood boys. I found the countryside very much changed. The beautiful valleys and homes and fields that were once attractive and productive were now grown up and abandoned, though now and then I could see an old-time home kept us as of yore. I was met at Sanford Station by Mr. Frank Geddes, the present owner, a kind and genial gentleman who surprisingly is a bachelor. He has kept the place up and made a great many improvements, including milking a great herd of fine Jerseys. He entertained us in a charming manner together with his niece, Miss Bridges. We could not have received any more royal or better entertainment in any land, city, or country. My youngest daughter, Pearl, and my brother's wife, Julia Allen McClatchey, were with me on this trip. They were charmed with the old home and felt they could now appreciate the place talked of so much by my brother and myself. The first night, while sitting around the family circle, enjoying the wonderful hospitality of Mr. Geddes and Miss Bridges, the phone rang. To my surprise, I was called to the phone by my boyhood friend, Henry Matlock. He invited us to his home about 3 miles up the old Easton Valley. So after a pleasant 2-day stay at our old home, we were driven on in fine turnout, Miss Betty Bridges accompanying us. On the way, we passed the home of our old friend and neighbor, Bill McCamey. We stopped a while, and Bill and his wife, Mary, could not do enough for us in our short stay. We left expecting to return, and were sorry we were not able to do so. On we went up the valley 2 more miles to the home of our friend Henry Matlock. There was the same old Henry. When I left the old Riceville Academy, his wife was a schoolgirl and now is a mother with grown children. How hard to realize this is true, but true it is, and she met us cordially and introduced herself as Henry's wife, though I needed no introduction. I could see the same as Laura, though she had grown to be much larger. But here was the same fine brick residence that I used to visit with my mother on her visits to Mrs. Matlock, Miss Martha Matlock, and John and Henry. Here was another palatial home with a herd of fine Jerseys, fine land, the finest horses with every convenience, and the latest appliances such as telephones and sewage plumbing. It would be useless for me to undertake to describe the royal treatment we received at this happy home. I might stop and tell about occurrences during the war, such as the time Henry and John Matlock had their fine horses hid in a large straw pen on the place to keep the Yankees from taking them. Then they told about the time Henry took his old musket and defied a crowd of a dozen soldiers. One of them was mounted on Henry's own horse. The soldier dismounted and gave up the horse, much to Henry's surprise. But it was plain Henry meant business when he leveled the old musket and issued his orders. Henry did not know whether the gun would shoot or not, but he had gone so far he would not go backward, and it was death or the horse with him. He took the horse. Many other occurrences of similar nature might be told. After spending 2 or 3 days with them, we were driven up the dry valley road to Athens behind one of Henry Matlock's finest span of horses. We were told the old East Denali road to Athens was hardly passable. This surprised me, as 40 years ago it was one of the best roads in the neighborhood and thickly populated. Many times I had ridden over it to Athens and to Cedar Springs campground. But I discovered of the campground only the land remains. The camp is no more. After a 10-mile drive, we landed at the old Mundy House in Athens. Surprisingly, here there was little change. I saw on the familiar streets the same houses. Even the old Ocoee Bank building and the old Clegg Bank building are still there. We found the home of Colonel Ellis Keith, where I used to visit with my mother. She and Mrs. Keith were great friends, and I have many pleasant recollections of that home remaining with me still. Mrs. Keith was the only daughter of Dr. Forey, whose name I bear. He died years before the war, leaving his wife a widow. Now Mrs. Keith lives in the old Forey home, a large, magnificent house on the edge of Athens. She heard we were in town and invited us out, and we were welcomed and entertained with hospitality beyond description. We met her son, Ellis Keith, and her daughter, now Mrs. Fraser, wife of the governor, each with their grown children. Here I found the same genial friendship I used to enjoy when we were children. And so is the written letter of Devereaux Forey McClatchey, written 121 years ago, still very much alive and very viable to us today. And now, folks, as we continue looking at the gently flowing East Denali Creek, I want to share with you one final letter from William Penn McClatchey, written around the same time, just at the turn of the century, around 1900, 1901, about 41 years after the family left here and went to Georgia. This is a very fascinating letter. It's long. If you don't want to listen to it, that's fine, but you'll find well worth your time to listen to this magnificent story. A visit to my boyhood home by William Penn McClatchey. And now tired of folly's fleeting breed, and scenes where oft the heart must bleed, where every joy is mixed with pain, back to this lovely green retreat, which infancy rendered sweet, I guide my wandering steps again. What memories crowd upon me as I survey the place of my birth and childhood days. On Sweetbriar Hill stands the same old mansion where I first saw light. Alas, it has fallen into other hands. Before I can remember, my mother had planted in the yard a holly bush. This has grown to be a large tree, and Mr. Geddes, who now owns this place, has changed the name to Holly Hill. The name being suggested by this large and beautiful tree. From this hill can be seen a long stretch of the beautiful East Denali Valley. At the foot of the hill, the East Denali Creek winds its restless, impetuous way through what is known as East Denali Valley, rich in soil, minerals, and traditions. In full view of the house, it stands by where the old mill, built when I was a child and known then as the largest and best mill in all the country, vividly comes to mind the scenes around this mill. In those days, people kept on hand grain sufficient to supply their families and had it ground as they needed it. Often have I seen several acres of ground around the mill covered with wagons waiting for their load to be ground. Sometimes, on account of the rush, they had to wait a day or two. What of that? It was an outing greatly enjoyed. Some fished, some pitched quoits, and let me stop there and say, do you know what quoits is? It was actually horseshoes in a way. It turned into horseshoes. And then he continues. Or they played marbles while others watched the modus operandi of sawing huge blocks of marble into slabs for tombstones and furniture. When I tired of this, they crossed the creek and watched the preparation of wool for making clothes, then passed on to where Cage Ford was forging irons for wagons and threshers, and if things got the least bit monotonous, Ford would take up his banjo and play little ditties such as Chicken in the Bread Tray and so on. Those were happy days. In those days, people lived sumptuously, did not worry and fret over where the next meal was to come from. If they wanted to go to camp meeting or to a muster, they would hitch up and go. Distance cut no figure. The whole family would go and take enough good things to eat to feed a whole regiment if the food had been put up in diminutive packages like those get who have to live out of paper sacks. The world do move, but whether moving to better or worse is the question. My old home place is now owned by Mr. Frank Geddes. He is an up-to-date foreman, looking over the different fields which I used to know as the Farmer Field, Lemon Field, Quillen Field, McClatchey Field, Teague Field, Brookshire Field, and so on. I inhaled the same sweet, refreshing odor of new-mown clover. I noted the numerous wheat shocks, haystacks, and waving cornfields that compared favorably with what I saw there when a boy. Mr. Geddes also has a great deal of improved stock. His treatment of the farm seems ideal. Passing through, familiar faces were not to be seen. William McClatchey, with peculiarities that made him quaint, has passed over the river. John McClatchey I did not see, and don't know that we would have recognized each other had we met. Although we used to play hide and seek and seek around the new-made straw pile, the older Parkinsons are all dead. So with the Dodsons and the Callaways. Henry Matlock, that prince of farmers and entertainers, is still living and very busy transforming things by combining the best of the old and new methods so as to get the very best that is out. He does not even seem to get old. Some of the younger porters are still living around Riceville. Nearly all the Rices are dead. How lonely it makes one feel to go through a community where you once knew everybody and not see a single familiar face. When I have more time, I intend to get acquainted with some of the younger generation. I spoke of attending muster. I had better explain that, for I don't suppose there are many people living who know what a muster is. Well, the different civil districts of each county in the state were organized into military companies, and the county into regiments and brigades. These several organizations met at stated times and drilled, and once a year the brigades mustered for drill. My earliest recollection is seeing one of these brigades muster at Sweetbriar Hill. The whole valley was filled with vehicles and men, women and children, ginger cakes and cider galore, and on the side Mountain Dew. But in those days the dew was as nature designed it, and served to refresh rather than debauch. Civilization had not then progressed to the point of rectifying, which means destroying. In those days when there was trouble on the border, every man was ready, and all they had to do was to kiss his mother, wife, and the babies goodbye and go to the front. How different now. When there is serious trouble on the border, brass bands followed by automobiles filled with men, women, and children parade the streets of the towns and cities to work up enthusiasm. But when the recruiting officer comes around to get enlistments, he is told, "I can't enlist. I can't leave my business and family. You get Bill Jones. He has no family. In fact, I have not lost anything in Mexico. At length, the Joneses are enlisted and sent to camp. Then the surgeon examines them, and 50% of them are rejected as physically unable to perform the duties of a soldier. I leave the reader or the hearer to draw his own conclusions. Which is the better method of preparedness? What are the causes of physical degeneration and the decadence of the spirit of patriotism? Here I find I have wandered from the scenes of my boyhood days and gotten lost in the labyrinth of modern methods, preparedness, and general decadence, to get back to being a boy again. I visited the old swimming hole in the creek, where I used to take the little Negroes and go swimming. The modern swimming hole may be a fair substitute, but never equal to it. As I returned to the house, I passed the place where stood the Negro quarters. The houses are all gone, but what memories! The happy voices that made the whole valley ring with the old-time songs are now hushed in death. Methinks I can still hear Uncle Jack's voice as he tells ghost stories which made my hair stand on end. I walk over to a nearby hill, and there under the stately oaks rest some of our household, who once aided in filling our house with glee. The house where fond mother bent at night over each fair sleeping brow and a mother's kiss bestowed. Where are those dreamers now? One sleeps where southern vines are dressed, above the noble slain. He wrapped his colors around his breast, on a blood-red field of southern slain. The others o'er them the myrtle showers, its leaves by soft winds. They faded midst southern flowers, the last save one of that loving band, and parted thus they rest, who played beneath these same green trees, whose voices mingled as they prayed around one parent knee. Passing up the valley, I passed the Dogwood schoolhouse where I attended my first school. It, too, had undergone some changes. Here I studied the old blue-back spelling book, Davy's arithmetic, and played bullpen with the boys and addy-over, cat, and jump rope with the girls. And thinking the matter over, I believe the foundation of education was better laid in these old log schoolhouses by studying the 3 R's than now in modern schoolhouses using what are known as improved methods. Friday afternoon was generally devoted to cross spelling. These contests were exciting and inspiring. The boys tried to excel the girls and the girls the boys. In these modern times, the children do not learn the alphabet first as of old, but they learn to spell, if they learn at all. I sometimes think the eliminating and refining processes of the present day, as applied to education and almost everything else, even to our food, has made a nation of dyspeptics, mentally, morally, and physically. As I survey this beautiful East Denali Valley, rich in agriculture and minerals, I wonder how it has escaped the prospectors and the speculators. They are usually as persistently active, and they are as pestiferous, and I like to have said carnivorous. I don't want to say anything that will bring pestilence upon the good people of East Denali Valley, but I must say there is more undeveloped iron and copper in that valley and the adjacent Red Hills, which we used to call Cracker Neck, than any other section of the state, and the agricultural lands cannot be excelled. Then the farmers are up to snuff. Well, I must stop, for I discovered that in giving an account of a flying trip through East Denali Valley, I got lost and came near not finding my way back between preparedness, modern education, mental, moral, and physical decadence. It's a wonder I did not get wrecked on infantile paralysis, a new fad the doctors have started up to frighten people into taking the nostrums at an advanced price, on account of the war in Europe, you know. Possibly I should have said you don't know. In saying adieu, I can think of no more fitting words than those of Dr. John Leyden. Dear fields, in vivid green arrayed, when every tent at last shall fade in death's funeral cheerless hue, as sinks the last fading beam of light that on mine eyes shall gleam, shall I turn your scenes to view. And so writes William Penn McClatchey, the son of Willie Garrett McClatchey, one of the last owners of the clan of this wonderful place. I hope you've enjoyed this series and this episode today. And so, folks, we say goodbye in this episode to the McClatchey farm and mill. What a joy it was today to visit and learn so much about a wonderful time so long ago. Only 11 miles from Athens. I hope you'll come and enjoy. This is truly a treasure of Athens and McClatchey County. Until next time, get out there and find the businesses, the restaurants, the people, and the places, the treasures of Athens.